Hello and welcome to this FB Live program. I am Manish Samnani and I, along with my wife Malvika, we run a center called Soch in Gurgaon, India. And we have a multidisciplinary team that takes care of children with special needs and any other developmental difficulties. We are very delighted to have with us Stephen Shore. He is Dr. Stephen Shore. He is a PhD. He's a professor of special education. He is someone who is an autism advocate, someone who travels extensively throughout the world and spreads his own autobiographical way of knowledge, understanding about autism. So, welcome, Stephen, to this FB Live program. And Stephen, I know that at the age of 4 years, you were recommended institutionalization and you were nonverbal. Tell us something about your journey of being on that aspect of the spectrum to what you are now and what you do now. Tell us something about your journey.
Oh yeah, it's an honor to be here, Manish, and thank you to Bangladesh and all the Faith Bangladesh and all the organizations that make this possible. Taking it from the beginning, things were pretty months, like what happens to about 30% of us on the autism spectrum. I was struck with what I refer to as the regressive autism bomb. And what I mean by that is that I lost functional communication, had meltdowns, withdrew from the environment, and in brief became a pretty severely affected autistic little kid. There was so little known about autism in those days that it took my parents a year to find a place for diagnosis. And when they did, at age 2.5, the doctors recommended institutionalization. However, my parents, like we see so many parents today throughout the world, they advocated on my behalf and they convinced the school to take me in about a year. And it was during that year that my parents implemented what we would today refer to as an intensive home-based early intervention program. And this was a program that emphasized music, movement, sensory integration, narration, and imitation. And that's just today's terminology for what you might say didn't exist then. Not even the concept of early intervention existed. And what my parents did is when their initial attempts to get me to imitate them failed, and imitation is a time-honored teaching technique, my parents flipped it around and they imitated me. And once they did that, I became aware of them in my environment. And I believe the key implication is that it is a prerequisite for doing successful work with an autistic individual. You have to develop that trusting relationship first. Then you can move on. And with the work that my parents did, speech began to return at age 4. I entered the school that initially rejected me. I got reevaluated. And instead of being considered as psychotic and ready for an institution, I got upgraded to neurotic. So things were looking better in the world. At age 4 is when I had my first highly focused interest. I was found by my parents taking apart a watch with a sharp knife. I'd pop open the back, extract the motor, take out the gears, spin them around, put it all back together again, and the watch still worked. And there weren't any pieces left over. Now, what always has been fascinating to me, and Manish, you are an occupational therapist, is how could I have the fine motor control to disassemble a watch and get it back together again? But where did that fine motor control go when it came to penmanship? Because so many of us autistic people are penmanship disaster areas. We do have some clues as to the neurology of or what we do know is that this is an example of the fine line of demarcation between ability and gifts of autistic people and disability. So there are disabilities, there are challenges that come with being autistic. We can't deny that. If they weren't there, we wouldn't be here all trying to figure it out. However, at the same time, there are gifts that can come with autism as well, primarily due to the fact that we tend to have an extremely widely varying skill set, which means the things we're good at, we're incredibly good at. The things we're not so good at, yes, those can present significant challenges. So my parents, noticing this, instead of taking what I call a deficit model of autism, thinking of autism as a series of deficits, disorder, and disability, they focused on ability. What can our autistic child do? Next thing I knew, there are all kinds of other devices to take apart and put back together again. They supported my strength. They recognized the ability, but at the same time, they were still cognizant that there were many challenges that I would need to overcome if I were to lead a fulfilling and productive life. So at that time, maybe it would have looked like that I could be a watchmaker or a watch repairman. I certainly would have needed a lot of support in terms of communication, because speech was just beginning to come back at that time, and living as an adult. So as we move forward, it was regular school kindergarten at age 6. I was a social and academic catastrophe. You know what happens to people who are different in grade school? Fortunately, school systems have begun to realize that bullying is not a developmental phase that people need to go through, but something really needs to be done about it. Academically, I was about a grade behind in most of my subjects, all through elementary school. And my elementary school days were spent going to the library, getting all the books on my favorite subjects. And that might have been aviation, space exploration, earthquakes, weather, volcanoes. And I'd read them all, I'd take notes, copy diagrams, then put them away and get all the books on something else. And sometimes I'd even wonder if there was more to school than just reading my favorite books. Shouldn't we be reading in groups or something? And I think what it translated to is that teachers didn't know how to reach me. And since I wasn't a behavior problem, it just kind of left me to my own devices. And in those days when there was so little known about autism, that was probably for better rather than for These days, what I find encouraging is that increasing numbers of educators would notice a special interest, say astronomy, for example, and then find a way to teach mathematics through that highly focused interest. So in a way, those focused interests can be a strength. It can be a gift. So on to middle and high school, things got better, even though that's so commonly a challenging time for everybody, autistic or otherwise. Two main reasons. One is I realized that using words instead of sound effects from the environment really helped with social interaction. Secondly, I was able to engage in my highly focused interest of music. And the silver lining with middle and high school, with all the challenges that come with it, is that is when you start seeing courses, clubs, and activities based on particular interests. I got so fascinated with music that I got it into my autistic head that I needed to learn how to play all the instruments. And I'd spend hours in the instrument closet figuring out how all of the musical instruments worked. And while I didn't learn them all, I did get it up to about 15. And then when I found out that a requirement for a degree in music education at the college level was you needed to learn how to play all the instruments, it just seemed to be a natural to go into that major. And that's exactly what I did. And my parents, recognizing my interest and abilities in music, they fostered these interests. They bring me to various community ensembles that I would participate in, I'd play in. We'd listen to music, we'd analyze music, do all kinds of things to music. And that's probably part of the reason today that one of the things I do is I give music lessons to autistic children. Because in addition to all the therapeutic benefits that people get by engaging in music, it provides a real-life skill in which to develop interactions with others. Also, music is just plain old fun. And then finally, I haven't figured out how to teach typical kids yet. So I just stick with the autistic ones. They just make a lot more sense. So it was off to college. Studied music for my bachelor's, my master's, my doctorate, did all the coursework for a doctorate in music education. And then I started becoming more interested in autism. So I defected from the School of Education over to I defected from the School of Music to the School of Education.
Okay.
In special education with a focus on autism. By that time, I had already written a few books on autism, including an autobiography, Beyond the Wall, which, by the way, is just about finished being translated into Bangla by the Shuchona Foundation. So that we're looking forward to the release of that book in the near future. And now, if we look at today, I spend my time mostly, well, now with the pandemic, things have changed. But anyways, at least before the pandemic struck, I'd spend most of my time either at my university teaching or researching on issues related to autism and special education, traveling around the world to a total of 51 countries so far, talking about autism. I've been to Bangladesh, I think 4 times already. I've been to India probably a dozen times, many of those times with Manish, doing workshops with Manish, for Manish. I look forward to when the pandemic lifts and we can resume doing these workshops. I write about autism, my books on autism, publications in research journals, and various other types of articles, and then finally giving music lessons to autistic individuals. And right now with the pandemic, here I am at home with my wife, still doing my work, but now it's all emanating from home. So that's what brings me to where I am today to talk to you.
Sure, that was amazing, Stephen, and it was a great, great story that many people will find is inspiring. So, like Stephen, you said that you have visited multiple times, Bangladesh also, India also, you have been visiting so many times. Over these period of your visits, you must have interacted with a lot of parents here as well. I'm sure you would have some overarching idea, something that would have come to your mind as a feel of the parents here. What is it that comes to your mind when you think about India and Bangladesh parents? What do you think are their specific areas of work to do, their strengths probably, or even their challenges? What have you felt as somebody who is somebody from coming from outside and joining us briefly? Have you been able to pick up few things?
Yes, I certainly have. Well, first of all, it's been an honor to meet so many parents in India and Bangladesh who autism spectrum. And what I find is that whether it's India, Bangladesh, Russia, United States, Peru, Japan, Australia, or any number of countries, parents are all the same. And what I mean by that is that all parents desperately want to find a way to make life better for their autistic children. That is what they want to do. That's the overarching goal, every single parent. And that is so encouraging. What I've been seeing also, that's also encouraging over the past however many years I've been to both countries, India and Bangladesh, is an increasing amount of awareness of autism, greater knowledge of autism. We still have a long way to go, and that includes all of us. It includes me as well. We don't know everything about autism. Nobody has all the answers. However, by working together, we can come up with so many more answers. And it all begins with this firm foundation of awareness, which I consider as the first of what I call the 4 A's of autism. And it's this awareness where in the United States, we recognize that 1 in 54 people are on the autism spectrum. And what I tell educators is that if you don't have an autistic child in your class now, the numbers are going to catch up with you and you're going to have one in the next class. So we've got to learn more about autism. And it's this awareness of autism when we see it, when it's in our midst, at home, in school, in the community, in employment, that builds a firm foundation, a solid foundation for the idea of the second A, which is acceptance. And what I mean by acceptance is that we accept that the autistic characteristics that we have, it's a part of our personality. We can't erase them. They're here for life. It doesn't mean that we just let the autistic child not learn a reliable means of communication, let them have meltdowns, and in general have a very difficult time. We don't just say, okay, go be autistic, we accept you like that. But like with my parents, who provided the gift of accepting me for who I was as an autistic person, but at the same time realized that there were a lot of challenges to overcome if I were to lead a fulfilling and productive life. So what's an example of acceptance? That's when I see parents, educators, and others turning away from working against the characteristics of autism. And one example could be, here we have an autistic child who needs some help in math. He's not that good at it, at least as far as we can tell. The child's not motivated to do math. However, the child has a particular interest in using a flight simulator on the computer. And a way of working against autism and against the characteristic would be, okay, we have identified this interest in using flight simulators on the computer as a powerful reinforcer, so we can use that as a motivation. Do your math for the first 20 minutes, get a certain score on your work, and then you can play with the flight simulator for the remaining 10 minutes. Now, if we accept this characteristic, this highly focused interest, we would turn towards using that as a way, using the flight simulator as a way to teach mathematics. And there's plenty of math involved in airplanes related to distance and how long it takes and how fast they fly and all kinds of things. And in that way, the subject of math now becomes intrinsically reinforcing. And that's an example of accepting and working with. The third A. The third A is appreciation. And that is where autistic people are valued for what we can communicate, what we can contribute to society. And we're already seeing examples of that. And in particular, some IT companies, such as Microsoft, Apple, Google, SAP, and so many others, actively seeking autistic employees because they know that many of us can do things that either nobody else can do in IT, or at least we can do them much faster than others. And certainly, sure, there are going to be some challenges, but the abilities far outweigh the challenges. Now, whenever I hear about employment in IT for autistic individuals, I also ask the question, well, what about everybody else? Because it's only a minority of us who are IT geeks. It's a stereotype. It's a big enough group so that IT companies take notice and make a big deal and write about it. It gets publicity and all that's well and good. But my question is, what about us autistic people who have gifts in other areas, such as sports, music, writing, or just about everything else that you could think of? And also included in the everybody else category are those of us who need more supports in order to be successfully employed. And what comes to mind, two things come to mind. One is the organization that was founded by Joanne Lara called Autism Works Now. I've done many conferences with Joanne Lara, Manish. I know that you've had she and I over for a number of therapy, also for Autism Works Now, and her latest, Glorious Pies, which is all about providing employment opportunities for autistic people who need more supports in terms of scheduling and communication and so on. And to this end, I think of a specific example of a fellow in Florida who is on the spectrum. He needs a lot of supports. He doesn't speak very much. He's got a few words here and there, needs a lot of structure to get through his day. And there's nothing more that he likes to do than to pull laundry out of a dryer and fold it with perfect creases. And he's faster and better at it than anybody else. Now, I know many people who would like help with their laundry. And he would be happy to help you with your laundry too, Manish. However, you would have to pay him to do it because that is his job. And he's fulfilled and productive doing something that makes a real contribution to society, would probably bore the daylights out of most other people, but he likes it and everybody benefits from him working. And then there's the fourth A, which is action. And it's action that's the glue that keeps those other three A's together. Whether it's the work we put into doing epidemiological studies to see what the rate of autism is in a particular location, whether it's seeking ways to develop interventions and educational strategies, whether it's working to change our frame of how we think about autism from a deficit-based model to an abilities-based model. And it's also finding ways to appreciate the contributions that autistic people can bring to society. So those are the four A's of autism that come to mind when I think about the gifts of autism.
Sure. What a wonderful description of the model that you just proposed. I think it would be amazing to see this model also being realized. So actually in the community, in the families, and by the parents. I'm sure we would definitely need more and more information about this model, because sometimes we are trying to fit the child with autism to the society. We're trying to fit him into the school. We're trying to fit him into the classroom. We're trying to fit the child to the curriculum and not the other way around. We are still not trying to fit the curriculum to the child, but the child to the curriculum. And hence, there would always be a lot of disappointment when it comes to parents, when they feel that my child still kind of struggles, and they might ignore the gift. They might ignore the abilities actually, because those gifts and abilities are so unique to this individual that it doesn't fall into the category of the social norm really, but is actually a gift for by him that he can contribute to the society, like you said. So it's amazing to know about it. So before I ask you the next question, I would like to inform all the viewers that they can put up any questions for Stephen. They can actually ask a question in Bengali language as well. And there are people on the backstage who can help us translate those questions. So do not hesitate to put in your question in English, in Bengali, in any way you want to, and we would love to take up those questions with Stephen. Stephen, like you said about advocating or parents advocating, like your parents advocated for you at some point of time. If a parent here in India, in Bangladesh, or in anywhere else, if he is somebody who is new to this whole autism world, what should he do? How can he start if he would like to advocate? What is his starting point if he's somebody who does not even understand what this advocacy for my own child really means? I'm sure he doesn't want to be on the wrong end of the society, or to be labeled, or the parent himself being labeled as biased or pampering their child. It's something else. It's something beyond what we can look at, because I'm sure the advocacy that you are talking about, we as a population, general population in India and Bangladesh, would still need a little more concrete ideas from you to understand what this advocacy means.
All right. Well, first of all, I would seek other parents of autistic kids and learn from their experience. Find an autism support organization look them up on the internet, do a search. And because we have the internet, and this is made especially clear during the COVID-19 pandemic, we can use the internet as a lever, as a force multiplier, in which to search for parents who have gone through this experience, who can help those parents who are at the beginning of their journey. And everybody starts in the autism world not knowing anything. That's just the way it is. And then by communicating with, by collaborating with others, parents, and support groups, we can then come together as a greater force for advocating for for your children who are on the autism spectrum.
Sure. So here is our first question from a parent, Stephen. Sumitra Paul Bakshi from Kolkata has asked a question about his 10-year-old son who loves swimming, and he also loves to relate. He relates very well to a particular movie star, and he tries to copy, imitate as much as he can of this particular star. What can you see as a potential if these were his interests, or if these were his abilities? What would you suggest to the parent or to the family that they could think of if a child has these kind of abilities?
Well, first of all, knowing about these interests and abilities is a gift, because we have something to work with. So if he's fascinated by a certain movie star, let's find out more about this movie star. If there's a challenge the 10-year-old son comes across, maybe a communication or a social challenge, maybe we can set up some sort of social narrative, such as a social story by Carol Gray, or power cards, or cartooning, or some other type of social narrative, where the central idea is, what would this movie star do in this situation? And what are some suggestions that this movie star could have in order to better learn mathematics, in order to learn the concept that while we love to swim, and that it's a very good thing to do, that we can't swim all the time, and especially during a pandemic, this is not something that we could do at this time. Depending upon where this child is developmentally, if he's fascinated by swimming, maybe that could be a launch pad towards designing pools, or making sure that public pools stay clean. There's so many directions that both of these interests can serve as launch pads to finding potential areas of study in school or employment later on.
Sure, I think it was a good enlightenment for the parent. Stephen, I had once a child whose mother said that my child can identify a model of the car to the precise accuracy, even if the car is completely covered with the car cover that you know that the cars have a cover, and which completely covers them up. However, this child can actually tell you the precise make of the car, the model of the car, even if you do not remove the covers. So I'm sure it must be a gifted visual perceptual kind of a skill that he has somewhere. But again, what would you, just to also make parents a little more, giving them some idea about how autism can be a gift? Can you think of something that can be planned for this young child, for his future, strengthening what he already has as a gift?
All right, well, that's also a great gift to know about this interest. And depending upon where this child is developmentally, for example, if he needs to be taught mathematics, there's plenty of mathematics involved with cars. If it's social studies, for example, and learning about other cultures, let's take a look at cars that are made in the United States, that are made in Russia, that are made in India, that are made in various countries, and start comparing them. Again, depending upon where the child is developmentally, for employment, I would think about employment in the car industry, whether it's doing work of some sort in an automobile dealership, whether if the child is more of a geeky type person, could he be involved in engineering cars and designing cars? Is that a direction he could go in? So these are just a few ways that I would think about following that particular automobile interest.
Sure. And I know from your autobiography as well that your interest of dismantling watches or clocks also went on towards cycles. So tell us something about your interest with the cycles and all, with the bikes.
Oh yeah, certainly. Bicycles, to be specific. By about I'd say by about age 8 or age 10, I started getting interested in bicycles. And I got to a point where I could take a bicycle apart down to the ball bearings and put that back together again. And there weren't any pieces left over either. That grew into an interest in bicycle repair. And in particular, I remember my first formal job was cleaning tables in a busy, noisy restaurant. And it just wasn't working for me. We didn't know much about sensory. That it was an overwhelming environment. It wasn't going to work. I needed to find something else I could do. So I thought about my bicycle interest. I got on my bicycle that I built from the ground up, even to the point of putting the wheels together, taking the spokes, the hub and the rim, and putting them all together to create a wheel. I got on that bicycle and I made the rounds of all the bicycle shops in my local area. Probably about a dozen of them. I'd go into the shop. I would locate the manager and I would start geeking out on my bicycle to the manager. And after a period of time of talking bicycle with the manager, I'd ask him for a job. Now it took maybe 11 or 12 times, but eventually got a job fixing bicycles. And now I could regulate my sensory input by staying in the back of the shop, fixing bicycles, or I could come out to the front of the shop and perseverate on bicycles to people who walked in. However, I think the owner of the shop called that selling bicycles. So I think some important things to take away from this, and this is something that Temple Grandin also talks about, and hopefully we can get Temple Grandin on the show at some time. It's called the portfolio method, getting your work out in front of the person who has the power to hire. So inadvertently and unawares of this approach, really that's exactly what I was doing. Riding in on my bicycle, showing the shop manager my bicycle that I put together, talking bicycle geek talk with him, having him understand that I knew my way around a bicycle. And then by the time I asked him for a job, he knew that I understood bicycles. And that way I short-circuited the whole typical interview process of how much eye contact do you make, shaking the person's hand, making small talk before talking about the job, and all of that other type of stuff, which autistic people are really not good at. So that's a way of using a gift and an interest to finding employment.
Well, it's a fascinating story. So yes, like you said about Temple Grandin, and it would be huge for all of us here in India and in Bangladesh to have her on a live program, because I don't think we have ever had Temple on any programs live here in this region. So to all the people, including me, we really are looking forward. I hope that our attempts to have Temple with us one day, or maybe very soon, maybe along with you, it would be a huge advantage for all of us to get from her. So Stephen, like you talked about sensory, I have a question from a parent Farman Parvez, who is talking about her son, 14 years, on the autism spectrum, who would start head banging whenever they start working with him, whenever they give him a little structured work, he starts head banging. And I guess the question is about what can be done. In your view, what should be our next step for working with children who have such sensory or challenging behavior?
Well, first of all, something like this, I need a lot more information, and I need to do an observation. However, some of the things that would come to mind are, what can we do to get at the root cause of the behavior? What is the function of the behavior? My guess is that there's something about doing this work that is frustrating for this child. And I want to make sure that the child, number one, understands what we're asking of this child. Number two, does the child have the ability to do the work? So if a child has not mastered addition, for example, we can't ask this child to do multiplication. I'd also want to consider the environment and what potential sensory issues might be causing this, in part, because what might be happening is that he's challenged by the environment, but he can get through. But that last demand of work just pushes him over the edge, and it's just too much. So these are just some things that I would begin to think about if I were to get more information about this child.
Sure. I once had a child who had this head banging, and from the sensory perspective, we thought that, whatever input we were giving as a sensory input was only during the therapy or during the session. And we started thinking on how can we make sure that the sensory input to the head probably is a little continuous, is a little sustained sensory input. And we came up with a very simple solution of having a bandana around the head. Although it doesn't provide that huge amount of pressure that can substitute head banging, even then, this child actually had a lot of benefit, actually had a lot of reduction in his head banging, just because he continuously had a feeling of sensory input to the head. So what I was suggesting is maybe a sensory input that is more continuous or a more sustained, along with the behavior aspect that you discussed so well. If we could combine both of those input, it would be great to see how does it change or bring about a change in the child. So our next question, Stephen, is from Selina Sultana, and she's asking about any new guidelines or suggestions for our special needs community or for our entire special needs children during this pandemic that you have come across in any way, any nature. What could be a new guideline for the new normal that we are feeling is imminent?
All right, well, first of all, greetings to Selena. She's a friend of mine on Facebook, and this is a very good question that we need to address. And as I think about the pandemic and its effect on autistic people and actually everybody else, there are three big things that come to mind. I call them the big three. And the first one has to do with maintaining scheduling. We depend on schedules. We need structure to be successful. We need predictability. So whatever was happening before the pandemic, can we keep that as much the same as possible? The key word, as possible, because there are going to be changes. Even the very simple change, well, not so simple to implement, but the change that schooling is now done at home. And we don't go to a building and get our schooling. So that's a big one. So what are some things we could do to keep that schedule the same or as close as possible? And what I would do is, say we have a child who doesn't speak and uses pictures for communication. And perhaps around the house, there are various pictures guiding that child what to do to get up in the morning, have breakfast, go into the bathroom, do all the things you do in the bathroom to wash up, and get ready to go to school, perhaps on a school bus, perhaps walking, perhaps they get driven. But all of that has been scheduled out. The child is now used to it. Now, we keep the schedule the same as much as possible, getting up in the morning, having breakfast, washing up in the bathroom, and we now substitute walking to school or whatever transportation we take to get to school with a different picture, with a different part of the schedule, which indicates that you're going to go to this certain part of the house. And some people may have an entire room. Others, it may be a corner of a room, or it may even just be a desk where schoolwork takes place. So we go to that desk, and that's where we do our schoolwork. Most schools have an opening attendance circle of some sort in the morning. And what I've seen in many schools, for example, is that schools will recognize each child by calling out their name. And then we move a picture of that child from a poster that it's attached to of a home, and we move it to a poster or a picture of school. The child is now in school. Now we can take that same idea and we still have a picture of the home. And now, instead of school, we have a picture of the part of the home, the corner of the room, or the desk where education is going to take place. And now the child is there, and that is where we're going to learn. We can also schedule snacks. There's usually a snack in the middle of the morning, lunch, and so on, and then reverse the whole thing when the school day ends and it's time to go home. So that's an example of keeping things the same as much as possible. The second of the big three is communication. We need to make sure that we communicate in the best way that the child understands. So for some of us, it's by the spoken word, just like we're talking now. For others, it's using pictures. Others, it's written words. Whatever that is, make sure we keep communicating in that way. And then the third way, I should say the third of the big three, is self-care. And that's for Selena and for all the other parents out there. You have to take care of yourself so that you can be available to support your autistic child. So what that means is doing things that also renew and refresh you as well. And I know in India and Bangladesh, there's plenty of strategies that we can take from the study of yoga, meditation, breathing, simple things that can be done in maybe less than a minute, taking a minute break, such as breathing in and making a fist. And then when you breathe out, nice and slow, you stretch your hands out like that. And you do that 3 times, 3 nice, long, slow intakes and outtake, or breathe out. And that should calm you down. If you need a little bit more, then you can do the same thing. You breathe in and you breathe out. And there's many, that's one of just, I'm sure, thousands of techniques. You can take a little break for yourself. And those are the big 3 that come to mind. Another thing that comes to mind is often we think that our child is regressing during these times. Suddenly our child is engaging in various behaviors, self-stimulatory behaviors and whatnot that they haven't done in years. And now they're going backwards. Reframe that to, this is how the child is coping and self-regulating during stressful times. And if you think of yourselves, what do you do when you're stressed out? And are you now having more stress during this COVID-19 pandemic? The answer is almost always yes. What are some things that you're doing, maybe more of, that you weren't doing before? Well, it's the same thing for the child. So if the child needs to carry around and squeeze this toy cat that they haven't done in a couple of years, it's like they've rediscovered this old self-regulatory behavior, now they're doing it again. Well, maybe we just need to let them do it, because that is how they are regulating themselves. So that's what comes to mind. A few things that come to mind when coping and even thriving during this unusual time of pandemic.
Thank you, Stephen, for that. And there are a lot of very relevant questions as far as our topic for today is concerned. So I'm very happy that the kind of questions that we are receiving now are all pointing towards or starting to think towards the ability. So I'm very sure the intention of this program has already been achieved, Stephen. So let me go. Having said that, let me go to the next question. Ifat Jahan Chaudhary has asked that her daughter is 9 years. She loves scooter driving. She loves scooter driving, and she has perfected it. She went on to the next level, and she started doing scooter board, and she is now excellent in scooter board as well. And now she wants to know what could be a next step for a child with these kind of strengths.
All right. Well, thank you for telling us about your child's gift of balance, which is good. Practitioners of the Miller method would be very happy to hear that, because practitioners of the Miller method, which is a developmental approach for supporting autistic people, surmise that autistic people tend to have poor body to environmental relationships. We don't always know where our body is in space. And if you don't know where your body is in space, and for example, how much force to use to accomplish a task, then that's going to make it very hard to communicate, to learn, and practically do anything. And occupational therapists, I know that you focus on these things a lot as well. So there's a lot of commonality between the Miller method and occupational therapy. So anyways, let's take this further. As a launch pad, is this something that the child could do more of in certain ways, such as riding a bike? Might they get interested in bicycle repair or skateboard repair, scooter repair, if their mind goes in that direction? Might the child want to get into something related to gymnastics? Once the pandemic lifts, we're not going to be suffering under this pandemic forever, even though it seems like we are at this point. Eventually, it will lift, we'll have a vaccine, and we'll have some way to work with it, and we'll get back to what they're calling a new normal. So these are some of the things that I would think of as a child who is eagerly riding skateboards and scooters and things like that.
Sure, that's a good idea. Another question which is very related to this one, and I'm sure, and we are free to say that you will have to probably think on the same lines, is from Panna Sakina, and she has asked that her son can do bicycle very well, and so what could be the next step for his son? She hasn't mentioned age yet, but yeah.
Similarly, we could use the bicycle as a launch pad. And what about this bicycle? Does this child, for example, need help in learning subjects in school? Is there a way to use bicycling as an intrinsic reinforcer? Whether it's mathematics and bicycles, or what countries do bicycles come from, to learn about people in other cultures, to actually riding the bicycle, and might this person get into bicycle racing at some time, or bicycle repair? In India and in Bangladesh, there are many times when I've seen someone sitting at the side of the road, and clearly this was kind of like an ad hoc bicycle shop where they turn the bicycle upside down and fix a flat tire or do something else. So bicycle repair is also a good possibility.
Sure. And this question, I'm sure you must have answered a couple of times before, and you would have answered in other parts of the world as well. Sujata Seth Hore has asked that her son, who is 9+ years, can tell the days of any dates of any given year within few seconds. I would like to know how to channelize this potential in purposeful ways.
All right, well, this is a great skill that I've seen. As you said, Manish, there are many autistic people who have skills that are similar to this. I wonder how he is with mathematics in general. Jerry Newport, an autistic person, one of the first autistic people to start talking about they being autistic, like Temple Grandin. And he has a skill, he has this internal calendar as well. when you were born, and then he'd tell you what day you were born on, and also tell you how many seconds old you are. And he would be right. And so I'm wondering if there's something related to mathematics or the organization of information that this child might find fulfilling in terms of future areas of study and employment.
Sure. And so here is another question again in the same lines, but I'm really loving the way the parents are thinking on this panel of viewership. Saf Safi has asked that her son is 7.5 years old, diagnosed ASD. He likes to do every possible thing which a neurotypical child would like to do. He's a natural learner, easily can cope up in every situation. But the fact is that it's very difficult for the parent to teach him anything structured. He is not ready to focus or concentrate, which he doesn't concentrate on something that he does not like. The question is that should I force him to to learn strictly, or let him learn, or let him be free to learn naturally, which he would like the most?
All right, this is a great example of observation, observing an autistic child. What are their likes? What are their dislikes? What are their strengths? We can see that he learns in a natural manner much better than any others. So as a result, that is how I would structure his learning as much as possible. And at the same time, bit by bit, little bit by little bit, finding ways to insert tiny little bits of structured learning. Because there may be situations, or there will be situations, that come up in his life where he's going to be told that he has to learn something, and he's just got to do it. For the most part, I would go with the natural style, and that's actually a gift that he can learn what he needs to learn in this manner. With autism, we have a diversity of learning styles, abilities, disabilities, and just about every other vector that we can think of. This huge diversity within the autism spectrum.
Yes, and I'm sure, when it comes to structured learning, when it comes to these challenges of taking interest in the structured learning, there's one saying that I always like very much, that is always used for all the children with the diversity that we see, not just for the children with autism. And the saying about, if I cannot learn the way you teach, can you teach me the way I learn? And with that, I feel there is a lot of teamwork required between the parent, the child, and the educators to come together as a team rather than as someone who is delivering the structured learning, and on the other end is the person who is receiving the structured learning. So I feel that there's huge potential in every child, and it comes up in a way that we want to when it comes like a teamwork between the child, between the parent and the educator, rather than thinking of child as just as a young child who still has to receive a lot of information before he could have any say in what he would like to learn. So I'm sure that that's what you also meant when you said that the child can actually be taught in a very naturalistic way. And even studies have shown that the naturalistic learning might have much better generalization, much better way of transferring from one setting to the another when it comes to being with children with autism especially. And I'm sure you would have also got questions from children or from parents of children who would have said that my child is brilliant in structured learning, Stephen, and he is able to complete everything that is given to him in front of the table, in front of him as a task. He's wonderfully and the most compliant child in front of the therapist. And their question is the other way around. And their question is, how can I make sure that whatever he learns in the classroom, whatever he learns in a structured setting, he carries this information and learning, and he implements this information learning to an unstructured setting, such as when he goes into the community, such as when he goes to the school, such as when he goes to the mall. What would you suggest to another parent, hypothetically speaking, or putting up a question saying that my child is wonderful in structured learning, but let me tell you, he does not come across to other people or to the community. He doesn't come across as someone who really knows anything. Whereas I know how he is, how wonderful he is in structured learning. How do you fill this gap when it is the other way around, Stephen?
Yeah, that is a big challenge. And that is usually how I see that challenge taking place. An autistic person may do great in school. We may learn mathematics, specific ways of doing mathematics. But then when we're asked to make change at a grocery, to check to make sure we got the right change at a grocery store, or to generalize, that is where things tend to be difficult. So what that means is that for those of us who learn better, or perhaps exclusively through structured instruction, we need to find ways to generalize, to get out in the community. So for teaching mathematics, say for example, we have a mathematics problem, you purchase some goods that cost a certain amount, you give that person this amount of money, how much change do you expect to get back? And that person may be able to do that, do that problem fairly well. Well, let's take that out into the community and let's do it in real life. So what that means is wherever possible, taking what we learn and experiencing it in real life. Another example is, I think back to the Miller method. I've seen some strategies where they'll have a child sit down at a table and identify an object, which is a cup. Point to cup, point to cup. And the child gets really good at it, and they can identify a cup as differentiated, say, from a glass or a dish or some other object. Then we ask the child, get me a cup from the closet. And the child has no idea what's going on. Now, what would happen in the Miller method is that to teach the word cup is really a matter of teaching the concept of the word, of what a cup is. So there'd be all kinds of activities, such as filling a cup with water, spilling that water out into a barrel and making a lot of noise. Same thing with rice, pouring rice, stacking cups in saucers, putting cups away, hanging cups on hooks, taking a cup and giving it to another person, opening up a box, and taking out a cup and then hanging it up. And in that way, the person can experience really what a cup is and what it does. And what that also does is help the person recognize a cup in all dimensions. And what I mean by that is that there are some students on the spectrum who may recognize this as a pen. Turn it sideways, they don't know what it is. And that's an example of object permanence. And that's something that most people learn as a young child. No matter what position this is still a pen, it's not a watch, it's not a can of motor oil, it's not a bicycle, but it's always a pen. And if we teach the use that we can put pens in boxes, we can write with pens, we can draw with pens, we can give a pen to another person, just experiencing the object itself for what it is will go far towards generalization.
Sure, I'm sure about learning by experience, experiential learning. So we can take up our last question for the session, and this question is by Sabrina Akhtar. She's asking about her 6-year-old son who is fascinated with some specific objects like train, key, spoon, and most of the time likes to draw these objects by a marker or a color pencil. How can I help him with this fascination? How can I take this fascination towards an ability?
All right, well, that's great because we now have the gift of what he's interested in. And so drawing keys, that's a great thing to do. Now let's use a key. What do you use keys for? What happens when you have the right key? What happens when you have the wrong key? How do you know what is the right key? Could this eventually become an interest that could lead this person into being a locksmith? And similarly with spoons, well, somebody has to design spoons and manufacture spoons, billions of them for the world. So could an interest in spoons go in that direction? So that is how I would think about these objects, as being a launch pad for accepting this interest. That's the second A. First, we're aware of the interest, we notice it, we accept the interest. Now we're going to work with the interest as opposed to holding them out as something that you only get if you do something else, and then finding a way to contribute to society via this interest or something linked to this interest, and that's the appreciation stage. And then working to make it all fit together, which is the fourth A, action.
Yeah. So that was great, Stephen, and I take this opportunity to thank you. And tomorrow, as you can see on your screen, we have tomorrow a neuropsychologist, Daniel Legoff, who is also an originator of the Lego therapy. And we will discuss with Daniel about improving social skills, improving social competence, about working with children using their self-motivation, using their intrinsic motivation rather than external instruction to help them come to the next level of social maturity. We'll talk about that in detail tomorrow. Be tuned and follow the program. I take this opportunity to also thank Ms. Nilofer Appa, Rafikul, as our managing the technical aspect. And thank you, Stephen, from all of us here, the viewers, from me, and from the team of Faith Bangladesh. We are extremely grateful for having you with us for this 1 hour. And let's hope that we will have Temple and you again on the same platform very soon.
That would be my honor. Thank you again. It's been a pleasure talking with you, Manish. I've been seeing a lot of messages flashing on this screen here by people I know, people who I've met. I see Aftab on there. It was great meeting you when I was in Bangladesh, and I look forward to when we meet again. And the same for everybody else.
Thank you, Mr. Aftabuddin, for your compliments, and I hope this was a program that was helpful to the parent community. And we will be back tomorrow with the topic and with our another speaker, and we hope to see you there. Bye.